Seeing none, I'm going to close the microphone for public comment, and we'll go on to, let's do staff comments first. Any comments from staff this evening?
I think the only comment, excuse me, the only comment is that you'll notice we've been doing a lot of work on the beach the last couple days. We're getting ready for the summer and putting together the beach, the lagoon closure, so that we'll get our full beach up and running for the Memorial Day weekend. And in addition, I do expect our contractor and beach and village lot 2 to be wrapping up their work tomorrow, at which point our crews are going to be taking over a few finishing touches on it, but at that point the lower lot will be open 24/7.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Any other staff comments? How about from the city treasurer?
No comment.
No comments? Council members? Yes, Stephanie.
I just got back from a trip to Michigan to go to a wedding, and the plastic bag ban issue is very alive and well back there, and they're a little bit behind us. But there's active groups trying to save the Great Lakes and their waterways, and as you know, they're avid outdoors people and fisher people and hunters and so forth. And of course, they have a huge tourist industry, as we do. And so it's becoming an issue everywhere. And when I went into a store and brought my own bag, they only gave me 3 cents credit. So, but it's better than nothing. They still have a huge way to go with recycling. And there's still huge numbers of towns and counties where you have to take your recycling still to a recycling center. That in particular case of the town that I went to is closed on Saturdays and Sundays, when that's when a lot of households would be doing their cleaning and their chores and things like that. But anyway, it was really interesting to read the local papers and to see what the issues were, which are a lot similar to what what's going on here. And everyone's trying to. Oh, and they had buy local signs also, and they shop locally, keep your money local, and support your local businesses and so forth. Some common themes, but it was very interesting.
Thank you, Stephanie. Dennis?
Yes, Save Our Shores did a beach cleanup today from the Antigua Apartments to New Brighton Beach entrance there, and they picked up approximately 150 pounds of garbage along that stretch. And that's it.
A lot. Well, yeah. This end? None?
Nothing.
Okay. I would like to report that I'm the representative to the Monterey Bay Air Quality Control District. I mean, that's the agency among the 3 counties of Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito that helps keep our air clean. We had our meeting today, this afternoon. The big item on the agenda is actually a very significant deficit for next year that the Air Board is looking at, $648,000. We are looking at ways to try to pare down that deficit. And the final budget is going to be approved on June the 18th. So if you have any interest in the Air District and how we spend that money, I would encourage everyone to contact, email, and speak up about the budget there. So with that, let's move on to the entree for the evening, which is the General Government Public Hearing. This is the presentation of the proposed 2014-15 fiscal year budget for the City of Capitola General Fund, the Capitola Successor Agency, and an overview of the Capitola Improvement Program. And we'll begin with the staff report.
Mr. Mayor, council members, first off, I want to congratulate our finance department on preparing, doing the bulk of the heavy lifting on preparing the budget for this year. Every department was involved and all put in a lot of work, but Tori and her, at this point, limited staff really put in a terrific effort, and I think you can have a good presentation this evening with a lot of good information. The way we're going to give you the information this evening is Tori's going to walk us through sort of the high points of the budget itself. At that point, then I'll transition and I'll take a little bit of a run through some of the key reserves, key changes, and look at the different department accomplishments and key budget items for next year. And then our Public Works Director is going to give us an overview of the CIP and the projects that are going to roll over from this year and the new proposed projects for next year. At the end of the evening, we'll review the calendar, and then we'll be looking for council to give us direction on items that they would like staff to research between now and the next budget hearing, potential changes they would like to see, modifications to the proposed budget. And we will also get an opportunity to hear from our treasurer, who will be conveying, I think, some recommendations from the Finance Advisory Committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tori for a presentation of the overall budget.
In looking at the budget, all of the council's budget principles were incorporated to all of the items that you'll see this evening. And to give you some budgetary highlights, the next 2 years have balanced budgets. Measure O sales tax revenue is just over $1 million, and you'll see how that's related to corresponding expenditures. All our core revenues are projected to be either stable or conservative increases, 1 to 3%. As you'll recall, at mid-year, we've seen some substantial jumps in our TOT, as well as a pretty good jump in sales tax. But while we believe that the trends are moving upward, we don't know if we'll be seeing that same trend going into this next budget year. Positions, we've added a Measure O funded maintenance worker, which is consistent with the Measure O 5-year funding policy. We have a reclassification of a mechanic to a senior mechanic, and the negotiated COLA and benefits. What you'll also see this evening is a recommended allocation of the residual fund balance of $475,000. Those numbers have been programmed into the numbers and charts that you'll be seeing this evening. Dependent on the Finance Advisory Committee's recommendations, the allocation may change slightly. We also have a proposal for establishment of a facilities fund along with one related project, and capital improvement project funding of $909,000. Just looking at some of the trends within the budget, if you compare fiscal year 13-14 adopted to 14-15 proposed, you'll see that the budget is going up by close to $500,000 in revenues, and that's primarily due to projected sales tax increases and TOT increases. And we've adjusted the mid-year estimate, so when you look at fiscal year 13-14, you'll see a jump there, and that reflects what we are seeing to date. Expenditures between 13-14 and 14-15, the majority of the increases that you'll see is related to the negotiated COLA and increases in flex care benefits. And you'll also see an increase in the transfers for fund balance. And looking at that, when you look at the fiscal year 12-13 ending number, you'll see that $746,000 amount. And a portion of that $500,000, or $475,000, will be allocated tonight. Close to $20,000 of that was allocated prior to fully fund the city's OPEB liability. Just looking at revenues, the majority of the changes, the majority of the years are relatively constant. The significant changes primarily take place in taxes, as well as you might see some changes in charges for services as we've reduced the successor agency allowance in fiscal year 14-15 to $150,000 versus $250,000. Most of the projections for franchise taxes within the tax category are remaining constant. You'll see some slight changes in intergovernmental revenues, and that's primarily due to changes in grant funding. Sales tax is projected to increase about 2.5% to 2.3%. These numbers are based on internal projections as well as comparing it to Muni Services, which is a third-party provider of sales tax information. You may not see the 14-15 jump as much within this chart. It's primarily because the 13-14 numbers included a greater than non-typical true-up, and we talked a little bit about that last year. It was close to about $150,000. One thing you might notice in the chart is in fiscal year 17-18, with the expiration of Measure O, we will be losing some of that sales tax revenue. Something that was a little bit surprising is that we're seeing an increase in the assessed valuation of properties. If you'll notice that fine line just below the residual distributions, you can see that there's a jump between fiscal year 12 and fiscal year 13-14. Our Auditor Controller's Office is saying that they're seeing between 2 and 3.5% in capitola for property values. So the projections reflect that number along with a 1% increase in the outlying years. TOT trends, right now we've seen at mid-year a significant jump, and we adjusted our budget by $245,000 for year-end, just because we've seen some increased performance from 2 key hotels as well as general economic improvement. We've looked at some trends and some benchmarks, including like the American Tourism Association, what they're projecting for hotel stays in the next year, and we've decided to use that as a benchmark for our fiscal year 15 and 16 projections, which include a 1.8% increase. Moving on to expenditures, the city's largest expenditures outside of transfers is 64.2% is allocated to personnel, or $8 million. And contract services is 21.8%, or $2.7 million. In reviewing these charts on the percentages, they do exclude the fund transfers of $2.3 million, and what we will do is go over a little bit of what those transfers consist of. And looking at year-over-year expenditures, the personnel services line between fiscal year 13-14 and fiscal year 14-15 has increased by close to $200,000, and that is primarily due to the negotiated benefit raises. You'll also see contract services has increased by close to $200,000. But if you look at fiscal year 13-14, we're seeing some increase in contractual expenditures related to surcharges on police citations, as well as increased water and utility cost. So those account for the less jump between fiscal year 13-14 and 14-15. In 14-15, we're also seeing the cost of the 911 center going up by close to $41,000. Most of the other expenditures have remained relatively constant. If we look at departmental expenditures, you'll see City Council has gone up by close to $10,000, primarily related to the election coming up. And the majority of the other expenditures have gone up due to the contract services and the salary incremental changes. And the city manager will be going into some of the core changes later on into this presentation. Just looking at the transfers, this chart shows a 5-year trend of how the transfers have changed over the city. Each of the transfers are color-coded. A couple of items in particular to look at is reserves and CIP. You'll see in fiscal year 11-12, we were only contributing $338,000 to reserves and $50,000 to CIP. And you'll see in fiscal year 12-13, those amounts have increased substantially. If you'll recall from fiscal year 12-13, we allocated some of the residual fund balance that we had, as well as proceeds from an insurance settlement. In fiscal year 13-14, there are 2 lines for comparison, adopted and amended. You'll see both reserves and CIP, a combined increase of $300,000. That reflects $150,000 allocated to CIP, as well as the $150,000 allocated to reserves that was done in December of this year. The proposed budget reflects Measure O contributions, as well as an estimated $200,000 coming from the projected fund balance and $200,000 coming from the proposed allocation of $475,000. Embedded in that amount is also $175,000 for the facilities fund. What you'll notice in year 15-16 is a drop in those amounts, and that goes back to the Measure O dollars, where approximately $930,000 is allocated between reserves and CIP. The remaining Measure O monies will go to, as in accordance with the funding plan, to the additional maintenance worker and public works and streets, and a small portion to PD policing efforts. In a review of internal service funds, this chart just highlights the $400,000 that was transferred to reserves to help replenish them in fiscal year 12-13, as well as their ability to recover. While we're seeing a slight recovery in 15-16 in equipment replacement, we're seeing a slight downturn in information technology. However, we believe that with future contributions we'll be able to bring these up. And looking especially at information technology, at once it was funded at close to $200,000, and right now it's close to $60,000. The recommended amount for that fund is $133,000 for equipment replacement costs. The following chart just shows contingencies and reserves, the history of that. It'll show the trough in 11-12 when we had the pipe failure and flood. Fiscal year 13-14, at the end of this year, we'll be projecting a balance of $2.2 million. And you'll see that slight dip. It's because the retaining wall repairs, which was related to the emergency, is coming out of that fund. In fiscal year 14-15, we're projecting reserves to meet $2.8 million. And in fiscal year 15-16, which is still a year earlier than projected, we're exceeding the Measure O contribution originally determined amounts of $3 million to $3.1 million. The $3.1 million number has been increased because the expenditures have increased. We wanted to stay consistent with our policy, which requires 25% to be placed in that fund.
So I think, you know, this slide in a lot of ways tells us a lot of the story of the city of Capitola over the last couple of years. You know, you can really see the economic downturn and the effects of the flood that we went through in 11-12, and then our steady recovery, primarily through a lot of policies and programs the council has put in place, as well as the new Measure O revenue to reestablish the reserves and really get a jump start on our CIP projects. At the end of this budget, as you see it today, if it's adopted the way it's written, we would be at $2.8 million in total reserves, which is only between $200,000 and $300,000 shy of the funding target that we have established. As identified in the Measure O campaign, the primary focuses of that was to reestablish the city's reserves, establish our city resiliency, and get a leg up on the CIP, which we'd fallen behind in terms of our street maintenance. You can see how we are allocating the Measure O budget, Measure O funding in this proposed budget. It's split primarily, the lion's share of its CIP and reserves, with a little bit to get our staffing and public works maintenance back to where we were before the economic downturn, and a little bit to enhance some of the community policing projects that the chief has put in place in the last couple of years. You'll recall that at the mid-year we talked about the projected fund balance, which was on the order of $685,000 at the mid-year. At the time the council looked at a potential allocation, we referred it back to the Finance Advisory Committee. Staff has met with the Finance Advisory Committee, and into this budget we have programmed in a specific allocation wherein of that last year's surplus we're suggesting $175,000 into the reserves, $200,000 into CIP projects, and then $100,000 into the facilities fund. I do believe that the Finance Advisory Committee reviewed that last night and has a slightly different recommendation, which the Treasurer can present to you, and we may be modifying our recommendation based on what the Finance Advisory Committee says, and we can change that in the adopted budget. So Tori mentioned this concept of a facilities reserve fund, and really what this is getting after is that the city owns millions of dollars worth of built infrastructure around the city of Capitola, and in the past it has been budgeted to take care of that on a relatively ad hoc basis. At the same time, we know that roofs need to be replaced, carpets need to be replaced, heating systems need to be updated. These things happen over time, and frankly, on a larger scale, they happen at a relatively predictable rate. And to try to normalize those expenditures a little bit, we're proposing a facilities reserve fund. In this budget, we're looking at $175,000 total allocation to the facilities reserve. That includes $100,000 from last year's surplus and then $75,000 in new money. In establishing the facility reserve, we took a look at other places that do this sort of thing, and one strategy in terms of a funding target, annual funding target, would be based on the depreciation of the current buildings and improvements, and using that mechanism, it suggests a funding level of about $70,000 a year. Alternatively, you can sort of do a percentage based of the replacement value of existing city facilities, which would suggest a far larger facilities fund need of between $200,000 and $500,000 a year. And we're proposing at this point, as I mentioned, $175,000 in this first year, and that we would look at it in individual budgets as we move forward. part of the genesis of this concept was based on staff's identification of a number of pending projects that need to be done around the city. And this is a list of sort of quick list of some of the things the Public Works Department has identified as probably being needed to address in the next couple of years. And it includes some relatively high value things like the roof on the City Hall, improvements to the restroom, the community room, the entry area of City Hall. Jade Street needs a lot of work, although of course the city's long-term status there needs to be finalized. The wharf needs work, the courtyard, all the way down the line on all the city facilities. Not the least of which is certainly the library, which is in the temporary building where we do have longer-term plans, or relatively near-term plans to build a new facility. So at this point, our recommended funding, as I mentioned, is $175,000 into this fund, and we've identified a $100,000 project that would include sort of reestablishing the community room for community meetings, and then water reduction projects kind of in the front of City Hall to reduce some of the turf and water demands that the city has there, as well as some improvements to the entry area to level off some of the broken asphalt, if you will, and create a little bit of a better space out in front of City Hall. We do believe that some of these expenditures are eligible for PEG funding. You'll recall that the PEG funding now needs to be used for capital improvements to allow the public to access council meetings. We view the community room as overflow seating for council meetings, and so some of the technology improvements, we will be looking at trying to shift those costs into the PEG fund, and ultimately in the final budget we may be recommending a slightly smaller figure here and some of the dollars to come out of the PEG fund.
Can I ask a question about that before you go away from that slide?
Sure.
The we have on the list New Brighton Gym and Jade Street. We really need to be careful about that because in the past we've told the school district that they're responsible for some maintenance, I thought, and it hadn't really been clearly delineated. So putting it here is putting it out there. It's like, okay, that's ours, I guess.
Right.
So it's going to be hard to come back to them and say, we thought that was your responsibility or partially your responsibility.
Yeah, I do want to be clear, and thank you for making that point. The gym at this point is held and titled by the city. Ultimately, it's going to go back to the school district. The question is when, and past practice has been for the city to take care of it. I'm not sure if that's a really sustainable pattern for the city to be maintaining a middle school gym in perpetuity. So at this point, I would treat this list really as just identified need, not necessarily one that the city is taking ownership of.
Yeah. Well, in the past, we thought, well, we better do it because then it'll get done, and that the place will then stay really nice, So needs to be some work. Some work definitely needs to be done on it, right? Sooner than later.
Before you leave that, Jamie, also along those lines, for the library, what's the relationship between the Joint Powers Authority and the city concerning the maintenance of the library?
Well, the current agreement, we have a lease with the Joint Powers Authority, and interestingly enough, the leases between the jurisdictions and the Joint Powers Authority are all different in terms of whose responsibility is what. Right now, the agreement that we have is the city takes care of basically the outside of the facility, and the JPA takes care of the inside. I'll tell you, I'm a little bit loath to spend money on that facility right now when we know its days are numbered. Nevertheless, for those of you who've noticed the condition of the exterior, the paint is peeling. It's pretty crummy. So we're trying to balance the need to keep the facility in decent condition, and at the same time acknowledging that, I hope within the next 24 to 36 months we're under construction for a new facility in Capitola.
Thank you.
You'll note the budget also includes specific equipment purchases out of the equipment fund. We're programming in a hybrid or electronic vehicle for the building department. They're currently driving an old Saturn, our inspector, which is sort of on its last legs. In addition, we need a new Public Works pickup. Those are both in this fiscal year. If this is approved, ultimately staff would go out and, pursuant to our purchasing policies, get bids and make the acquisitions. You'll note that in next year's planned budget for 15-16, we identified a hybrid or electric City Hall van. Staff is planning to revise that in the final budget. We're recommending now that we defer that acquisition The old sergeant's car is available to transport multiple staff members if we do have the need to do that, and we're going to see how that works. And instead, it's probably time to replace one of the marked vehicles next year. And you will note that it doesn't quite add up to 60,000, but I do believe that the mower will reduce to 20,000 to keep us within the 60,000 total budget. Overall, you can get a picture here of the permanent positions within the city. The key addition this year we're talking about is bringing us back to sort of a full level of maintenance worker to take care of our streets and parks. So we have a full complement of crew. And then in next year's planned budget, the only proposed change at this point is our city clerk currently works 90% time, and that she may transition back to full time. So now I was going to step through on a department by department basis and take a little moment to reflect on some of the accomplishments for the prior year and some of the key changes in this budget in the next year. And obviously the City Council, it was interesting to identify what were the accomplishments for the City Council in the year when realistically the accomplishments of the City Council are the accomplishments of the city. But so I took a step back and tried to think about the most biggest level, what were we able to do as a city? And we were able to adopt a balanced budget that's led to budget surpluses the last several years. We've taken many strides towards reestablishing the city's reserves, making it more resilient to both economic and natural disasters down the road. We've provided extensive funding for important CIP projects, and a long-held goal of the city to identify a use plan for McGregor was accomplished this last year, and we are well on our way to constructing improvements out there at McGregor. The only key change that I would call out in the City Council's budget this year is that the funding for community television, as you'll recall, is now coming from the general fund out of the City Council's budget, where previously we were using our PEG funding for that. In the City Manager's Department, we were able to bring forward collective bargaining agreements with all groups this last year through 17-18. The city transitioned from a self-funded dental and vision program to a fully insured program with an outside entity. We also implemented the new city clerk played a key role in this, implementing the new SIRE agenda management system to improve access to council meetings, provide better archiving system to the public when they want to see council meetings and particularly view a specific item from a past council meeting. The key changes in the city manager's budget for this year, we have increased funding for the council elections that are coming up in November, and we are proposing little funding, about $10,000 I believe, into a laserfish project, and what that is would allow for digital archiving of our current paper records. This would allow staff to access files and old documents far more quickly. Currently we store many documents off-site. The city has to, when we get requests for documents, has to wait several days in some cases before we can get the documents back and provide them to the public. So many other jurisdictions have implemented this, which means that planners will have old permits and plans available at their fingertip at their desktop if they have somebody on the phone, which in some cases they may even be able to email to people. So that is a key change and a proposal that's included in this year's budget. The city attorney, I guess it was in this last year, but we resolved all the litigation associated with the storm drain failure and provided legal advice to staff and the city council. And the budget changes in the proposed budget is essentially a status quo budget for the city attorney. The police department, again, big picture here is we were able to reduce violent crime in the city by 11%. We're now open 5 days a week in our front offices. And we've gone a long way towards replacing the outdated parking meters and expanding the pay station area throughout most of the village at this point. The budget changes, a lot of these changes sort of began to occur in this last fiscal year, but we took a hourly parking enforcement officer into a full-time position, so that full change will happen in this next year's budget. We're now contracting with the regional JPA for animal services at the same cost as we had before, but with far more capability to deal with a lot of animals if that were to come up. And the police department was able to negotiate a longer-term contract with the city of Santa Cruz for the lifeguard services, which again has been able to save the city money and provide more boots on the ground for the city during the summer. Finance Department provided a lot of the key work in the RDA wind down, really helped us get our long-range property management ultimately approved by the Department of Finance, which confirms the city's ownership of the Rispin property. They completed the initial phase of a comprehensive fee study, taking a hard look at all the city's fees, the city charges, to make sure that they're warranted. And you'll be seeing the results of that coming up here in the next couple months. We implemented a new payroll and HR software modules this last year, which was a huge work effort, and I'm happy to report that the payroll system works, and we are continuing to get paid, which makes most staff relatively happy. And we received the GFOA Award of Excellence for Financial Reporting for the first time this last year. And again, this budget for the Finance Department is primarily a status quo budget with significant changes. Community Development had a real, at least on track to have a banner year. We'll see where the general plan ultimately lands, but they've completed the draft general plan update in EIR, which has been something on the to-do list for a long time. Ultimately, the council will have to look at whether we're going to adopt that this year. They established an in-lieu parking fee program, a green energy incentive program. They established affordable housing asset limits throughout the city, and reinstated the emergency housing and field first-time homebuyer program. Also able to restaff the department with a new senior planner and a new half-time assistant planner, all by our new community development director. Key budgetary changes for next year's budget is that the general plan maintenance fee is primarily going to be used for our next housing element update. Unfortunately, it's going to be time to do that once again coming up this next fiscal year, and a small allocation of training funds for access specialist certification for one of our staff members to help us with our ADA compliance. And there's no additional general plan funding requests in this budget. Public Works, again, had a lot of projects on their plate this year, completing the Esplanade Sidewalk project, the Beach and Village Lot 2, and the expanded use of the pay stations. Looks like both the Police Department and Public Works are claiming that one for their own. They filled one vacant and one frozen crew position in this last fiscal year. We purchased a new street sweeper, a bucket truck, and a pickup truck. And we've implemented water conservation projects throughout the city. You'll see bits of lawn throughout the city slowly converting over to drought-tolerant landscaping. Our key budgetary changes, as I've touched on before, is filling the last maintenance position, crew position, establishing the facilities fund, and then in addition, due to the retirement of our longtime annuitant mechanic lead, there's about $10,000 in modifications to basically backfill the skills that the annuitant was providing to the city at very low cost. The other programs I'd like to touch on very quickly is in the recreation program. This last year we added a 3/4 time recreation assistant, primarily out of Affordable Care Act compliance, making sure that we were getting benefits to someone who's been working hourly for a long time. We established the Beach Certified Lifeguard Training Program for our junior guard instructors, which is something that we've wanted to do as staff for a long time, and I know the Recreation Department is really looking forward to getting Beach Certified training for our junior guard instructors. And they're planning on working with ActiveNet to explore options to enhance the registration options for individuals signing up for recreation programs, and maybe, just maybe, we can look at getting the junior guard to sign up online, which would be a monumental step. Art and cultural, they completed the 41st Avenue and Kiosk Art projects. They held 22 concerts, movies, and events. The Public Art app, and under the budget highlights for next year, I just can't wait to see what they're going to do next. I'm sure they're going to come up with some great programs for all of us. And then in the museum accomplishments is we hired our new museum curator, Frank. He opened his first exhibit, the Take Me Out to Capitola, The Life and Times of Harry Hooper. And there are some budget savings due to the position being filled at 50% time in this year's budget for the museum. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Public Works Director, who's going to walk us through the big picture capital improvement program, and then we'll circle back and close out and have opportunity for council questions.
Good evening, Council. So looking at the capital improvement program for 2014-2015, we'll start by looking at the funding that's coming into the program this year. There's $909,000 coming from local funding. That's a combination of Measure O funds of $505,000 and another $404,000 of fund balance that's being allocated to the CIP. Grants and other revenues, those are outside revenue sources. We have a total of $447,000. Grants from the Regional Transportation Commission for the pathway and railroad station improvements at Park Avenue and Monterey. $90,000 for roundabout design at Capitol Ave and Bay Avenue. We have $37,000 coming in from the Sanitation District for the repaving of Park Avenue. And as previously discussed by the city manager, the $100,000 coming into the CIP from the facility fund. And I'll go into how we're going to spend that in a minute. So the total allocation proposed for 2014-15 is $1.386 million. I also want to mention we are looking for additional grant funding that we'll be applying for this year or have applied for and we'll hear from this year. We haven't included it in the budget. So one is the airboard grant for the roundabout project. We have a grant, park grant for improvements to the Rispin property. We're looking at and being contacted with the county about an integrated water management plan that they have put together that accesses state funding for water quality or water improvement projects. And they strongly support reconstruction or repairs to the flume as part of that. We also will look at trying to add the jetty project, reestablishment of the jetty under that project. And we'll also be contacting the Coastal Conservancy. They know they've funded wharf improvement projects in the past to see if we can do something to kind of strengthen it so that we don't lose piles every now and then and do a pile replacement and look at possibly doing a redecking project on that. So looking at the projects, this year we've completed some large project in the Lower Pack Cove. We did do the slurry seal project and the Esplanade sidewalk project, which really wasn't anticipated this year, but kind of ended up with a life of its own. Unfortunately, we are carrying forward quite a few projects. The McGregor Park Development Project is close to going out to bid. We have finalized plans. We're just making some final tweaks on it. Clare Street traffic calming, as we know, that project is temporarily on hold. We wait for the Sanitation District, excuse me, to tear up Clare Street, and then we'll come in and complete the whole project probably in 2015. 38th Avenue reconstruction, I continue to struggle with some right-of-way issues there, but I hope to get that moving forward in the near future. Stockton Avenue pedestrian improvements, we have an approved design at this point. We are moving forward to try and get some lighting put in, but the actual improvements, council has agreed to defer till fall so we don't impact the key intersection in the village in the middle of summer. Park Avenue sidewalk project, we had some funding issues with that we're dealing with, but hope to get that moving as quickly as we can. And then the Hill Street pedestrian improvements, at this point we are doing some layouts and also working on the missing piece of sidewalk on Capitol Ave as part of that project. In the
Will you go back there? I'm sorry, just one second. What side of the street is the Hill Street proposed for?
it is looking at either most likely a bike lane designation on the south side of the street. So that way it would tie into the sidewalks going on Capitol Avenue.
A bicycle lane?
Yeah.
And then the pedestrian improvements, for the Hill Street pedestrian improvements?
Well, we don't think we don't have sufficient funding, and there is really interested in just removing the parking from one side of the road. So our idea is we will put a bike lane in there and use it for both pedestrian and bicycles at that point, rather than going to the cost of a complete sidewalk and bike lane on that project.
Have we talked to people in there at all recently? Because I haven't heard anything about it lately. Those people have all remodeled. There's some beautiful homes in there now. And I don't really even see that many people walking or riding their bicycle there.
I did
Is there
receive
really a need for them?
I'm sorry. I did receive a petition from the majority of them, and as soon as I get some plans, I plan on holding some community meetings with them.
Great.
Let us know if they don't want it, then I agree. It was at their request.
There's another reason, Steve, because the Safe Routes is talking about that as being a better passage for people coming from SoCal. They use Hill Street over
Right.
uh,
Yeah,
over
if
Rosedale
that gets
instead of-
designated as a
instead of going down Capitola Avenue to Gales.
yeah,
It's a
if
better
that gets
pathway for
designated
kids.
as a safe routes to school, then we would want to have a
Yeah.
better pedestrian pathway through there.
Yeah.
And you're including that one section of Capitola Avenue where
Yes.
we have the sidewalk? Okay.
Yes.
Why don't we have a safe pathway going on Hill Street over and cross over Brookville Terrace Mobile Home Park with a little bridge coming down by the school, by the church? And then the kids can walk over that way. If we had
I mean, I
money.
haven't looked at that, but certainly that would include, you know, some large right-of-way takes from the Brookvale Terrace
Well,
and the
yeah.
church and all that, but, and a bridge, when, you know, that's,
I mean, it would
that's a
be-
large expense, I guess.
Oh, it'd be way too expensive that we
Right.
couldn't afford, but I mean, that's the most direct route. If you want
Well,
to
it
get kids
is.
from that neighborhood over to the
Right.
school, that's the way over there.
Yeah. We did have a Safe Routes to School meeting last week, I believe it was, and kind of talked about the issues with it, with the getting to the school. One thing we're trying to figure out is have the school provide us some population maps on where people, you know, where the students are coming from that are going to New Brighton, and where there's large populations that we can actually improve. Because certainly there's parts of the district that are not going to walk and bike to the school, but if we can identify ones within a certain area and improve those routes, that's what we're interested in.
Yep.
So looking at the newly funded projects, total of almost $1.4 million. We have the Park Avenue paving and bike lane improvements between Kennedy and, I blinked out on the name, at the end of the city limits there. We have paving for Rosedale Circle, Carl and Alma Lanes. That's coming in the tails of the Noble Gulch Sewer Project, which will be going through there and doing open trenching on those streets. We have the Monterey Park and Railroad Station that we'll be working on. That's the recipient of the $250,000 grant from the RTC. We do have a Stockton Avenue Bridge hazard assessment. That's something we've talked about doing. What are our risks? What are our options on that? So we do have that funded this year. The community hall and city hall improvements. So I'll take a minute here and kind of give more detail. This is the $100,000 coming from the newly established facilities fund. As the parking lot and the new city or police department building over in the lower Pack Cove lot, Beach and Village 2 lot, gets completed, we'll be moving the parking enforcement people out of the community room and also be vacating what they now use as the evidence room in the old kitchen. So our plan there is to relocate our IT staff into what is now the evidence room, and then redo the community room in a more modern motif than it has been in the past, and make it an overflow for meetings here, make it a place where we could hold smaller meetings, still be able to televise them and all that. Along with that, we'd like to kind of improve the lobbyway, make it a more consistent entryway from there into the community room or into the city council chambers, and then some outside improvements to redo the seating area there, a water conservation project to remove the lawn and put a demonstration low maintenance, low water use project out there. So we haven't put all the pieces together. We're estimating it to be $100,000 at this point. As the city manager mentioned, we will be looking at trying to utilize some PEG funds for the community room portion of it and moving forward from there. Next on the list, as part of the Stockton Avenue Esplanade improvements, when we considered that project, the council approved the establishment of a village sidewalk cooperative project. That's to do more projects like we did in front of the restaurants this past year. Right now, we're recommending allocating $19,000 for that. Not sure that's going to be enough. If we get a big interest from the property owners to move forward, we may need to augment that funding as we go forward. We have the roundabout design at Cap Ave and Bay Avenue, so we have $100,000 of that, 90 as a grant. And we will be applying for airboard grants to help us with the construction of that. Brisbane Perry Park improvements. This is for pathway improvements between that are part of the existing pathways that are there. We need to make some improvements there. And it also includes a complete park design and EIR to finish the park. And hopefully this will partially get funded. We'll get some news later on that we can augment this funding with grant funding that we've already applied for. And finally, we've been looking for some water conservation projects throughout the city. Obviously, you've seen where we've removed grass here, moved grass along Wharf Road. We're kind of still trying to figure out key areas where we can remove sod, but we're looking for a bigger one. And what staff and we've received feedback is trying to figure out a way to reuse the water that's used on the Esplanade showers right now. So there's a couple choices there. We're not sure which ones will work yet. One is to try and recapture the water and use it for irrigation. There's concerns by a lot of people that that water may be too salty after people have washed off the ocean on it. Certainly be sandy. But we're going to do some testing of the water, see if it is, usable for, that would be the cleanest. We would then use it to irrigate the lawns in Esplanade Park and also on Lawn Way. If the water isn't usable for irrigation, then we look to try and plumb it in and use it for toilet water, flushing the toilets in the bathrooms at the Esplanade Park. So either way, we'll get it and reduce our water consumption at that park. So we have $30,000 there. Again, we're not sure what the final scope is, and that might be something else that once we tie it down, we'll come back to you for further funding.
Just a quick question. For the community room, could you add dropping the cable into there also? Because this is the perfect time to be able to allow that room to be televised also, because sometimes it will be perfect for a workshop, for a planning commission, for a joint city council planning commission workshop, for meetings like that, and it's a great room. It just needs to have the drop so that the person can televise it.
Right, and that's certainly what we're anticipating is something that will allow us to televise out of there.
Yeah.
Back to Jamie, I think.
I got one question for you, Steve. So we have a number of projects that are in design stage right now.
Correct.
Is there any possibility of looking for someone in the design business that could take on multiple projects for us and bring them a little closer? That the roundabout, Rispin Perry Park pathway, those kind of issues, is that we can get a contract that's maybe meant to be more fulfilling overall of the individual?
Yeah, well, my plan right now is, because obviously in the last year it's been difficult to address all the projects on our CIP, was to try and go out with an RFP to hire a consultant to assist me as being the city engineer, in which case they would take over the projects and be responsible and assist me in getting them done as a quicker manner. Is that what you're referring to?
Maybe bring somebody in-house to do it for us.
In-house, well, we could talk about that. I'm not sure we want to hire permanent staff at this point, or do it by consultant. We could certainly talk about that. I've promoted hiring in-house staff before, but I think at this point I'm interested in trying to. There's a lot of expertise, especially with the federal grants, that it's hard to get with somebody in-house, and we might want to go outside for that. But for right now, to get the program moving at a faster pace than I've been able to do in the last year, I want to move in that direction.
So projects that we're looking for the possibility of taking outside grants from, what projects do you foresee in that list? What
on these lists, well, we listed the ones that are getting grant funding on that side right there. We have grants coming in for the pathway and railroad station improvements and the roundabout. The other two are more the $37,000 is something the sanitation districts agreed to help us pay. So those are the grants we have committed so far, and those are the only ones I'm really including in the funding.
Which ones are the ones that we have on our project list that we could actually
hope to? Well, the Rispin Park, we have a grant application. We feel confident about that. And then the roundabout, I'm pretty confident of getting an airborne grant from that. The other two listed here are things we'll be looking into, the Flume and the Wharf grants. We're not sure what programs they are and what cycles they're in, but we're looking forward to looking into those.
Okay. Steve, the Coastal Conservancy grant, you've previously you called that the jetty project?
That would be, no, the integrated management.
Waste-
Yeah,
So what,
So the-
for the, I understand the flume, but
right. So
is
the other
that what
part
you're
of the beach, and I didn't listen here, and I apologize, is the main jetty on Capitol
Right.
Beach is sunken over the years, and it would be just to reestablish that to its original grades, which would help capture more sand and keep our beach larger than it is now.
I see,
It's more of a maintenance
to
project.
augment the current jetty.
Yes, back to its original design. We would not exceed its original design.
Okay, but you'll be coming back to us with that project
Yeah,
before we...
the future grants here are except for their, are projects that are undefined, or, you know, we're not asking for you to approve funding for at this point.
Right, okay,
sorry.
thank you.
Are you gonna go out to RFPs for the design of the roundabout right away, Steve? Is that something
Yes.
we're doing this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That was part of being the city, you know, this overriding consultant I'm looking for to help me with all those projects, because that is federal funding, and the necessary paperwork for that is astronomical.
And speaking of that, we've gotten some emails about that, so we're going to really have to widely notice people, I think, about that. There's real strong feelings about that. People either, you know, are willing to try it, or they just think it's not going to work, and why are we even looking into it, and so forth. So we're going to have to do a lot of outreach, I think, and let people know. And
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
it's-
well, the city of Santa Cruz is, you know, they've installed one roundabout and have another one, I think, getting near going out to bid, and the city of Watsonville is also, they both did large community outreaches, and that's certainly going to be
Yeah.
part of this. Right now, we're designing it to get an idea exactly what it's going to look like and how it's going to function, and then we'll begin the outreach.
Well, we've already
But
funded
this-
for the engineering, so we're gonna go through that stage no matter, regardless, right?
Right,
Then we'll go
exactly.
to a hearing time. Yeah, Sand City put in some fabulous roundabouts.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think
that's real commonplace
once
stuff.
Two new
people get
ones.
used to them, they'll find that they work amazingly well, so
Mhm.
I'm confident that it's the right project
Okay.
for that intersection.
Right, and to let everybody know that the reason the Air Board funds these roundabouts, because they are expensive projects, but they are viewed to be well worth the particulate reduction, you know, the carbon reductions compared to, you know, regular, you know, four-way stops that we have now. So there are statistically documented clean air benefits from the roundabouts, and so we should let people know, you know, the health benefits to them, and that's the reason why the Air Board funds them. Any more questions for Steve before he sits down about projects? None right now?
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Steve.
So I was going to just walk us really quickly through sort of a multi-year projection, which we introduced last year, looking out to the next couple fiscal years of what we see coming down the horizon. And then at that point, I'll turn it over to the treasurer for the FAC recommendation, and we'll kind of then close it out and turn it back to the council for comments and questions and public comment. You'll recall that last year when we looked at the multi-year projection, we were showing some potential issues coming up in the next couple of years with slight deficits associated with some of the expiration of Measure D, the reduction in the successor agency administrative allowance that's ultimately going to get phased away. You'll see now that in this proposed budget, in our multi-year projection, that we're not showing that deficit anymore. Revenues, as you're aware, outpaced our estimates from last year, and that deficit has been closed. You'll see this year in this slide showing what appears to be a large deficit in this year, and I want to explain that simply by pointing out that what that is it reflects the spending of the surplus funds that we had in our general fund from these last several years, so that there's more money going out the door than coming in the door. We're using those for one-time, or I would recommend using those for one-time uses, things like reestablishing the reserves and CIP so they don't become ongoing commitments. So key things to keep in mind that I think everyone in the council is well aware of is in 2017 Measure D expires, and we also see the POB debt, the pension obligation bonds, being retired. The net of that is at about a negative $400,000 to $500,000 to the city. So what that'll mean is that in 18, 19, and moving forward, we're basically going to be operating with a smaller budget than we've had today. Right now, we're projecting reduced ability to fund the CIP at the level that we've been funding it today. Obviously, there's going to be policy choices that the council would have to make at that point, an examination of options about how to either increase revenue, to increase efficiency, to reprioritize, but those decisions are down the road. The good news is this point, looking forward, we don't see any potential huge hits to our budget coming down the road that we need to be aware of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine.
One thing, Jamie, and maybe this is, question is for Tori. On the revenue section here, charges for services between 11-12 to 15-16, we're almost losing $500,000 there. Why? What is that?
From 11-12 to 15-16, I believe part of that is related to the RDA dissolution. In 11-12, we were recovering more revenues through the RDA, and we've lost some of those, as well as I believe and I can look a little bit further into that category, but what I want to say was in there is also some of the chargeback for services for planning that was also related to the housing element that was funded by RDA, and also I want to say that we also had the property, the mobile home park that could have been, then maybe that's in use of money and property. I would have to look at the exact titles to give you that number.
I think Tori's first 2 points were exactly on. I think the RDA was generating a fair chunk of it, and in those years in 11-12, we were billing the general fund maintenance fee for staff's effort to help update the general plan, and that's been phased out in these coming years. So I think that's going to be the primary driver.
We're going to phase that out, that billing fee for general plan maintenance?
Staff invoicing for the general plan maintenance. You know, we'll have a conversation. At this point, the general plan maintenance fee is sort of zeroing out, and then as we complete our general plan, complete our next housing element, we can have a conversation about what level it should be on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, we've talked about it for a couple of years.
Yeah, we have.
Okay. I'd like to see a further breakdown of why that happened. I mean, it seems to me considerable, but maybe we were charging that much for RDA services at the time. $500,000 difference on that time period.
I think we'll find that those are the primary drivers, but we'll take a look and we can come back at the next meeting with the charges for services and what was driving the changes.
As far as community development, they should actually be. Correct me if I'm wrong. They should be at a higher revenue service right now than they have been in the last 2 or 3 years.
This year's particularly good. I don't think we see any big projects, and Rich can talk to that a little bit if we need to, but I don't think we see any big projects coming up next year, so the revenue assumptions out of community development for next year are relatively conservative.
Yeah, Mike?
No, I'm good. I'll wait till the end.
Okay.
So with that, I'll turn it over to the city treasurer for a little bit of an update about the Finance Advisory Committee's recommendations.
The Finance Advisory Committee met last night, and we reviewed the budget, but we focused also our efforts on the recommendation we made previously with the surplus that we have, or the little extra that we have that is unexpected. We are motivated to give you the recommendation that we'd like to add a little bit more to our reserve fund. So the Finance Advisory Committee would like to make the recommendation to, yes, allocate $200,000 to the CIP, but decrease the amount to the facility fund to $75,000 and add to the reserves $200,000. We feel like maybe there's some things that we might need extra money for or extra funds for, and so we think it's really important to have that there just in case. So, any questions?
Do we have a copy of this?
You do. It's in right here.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's on page, it's about 8 pages in, roughly.
And I
Thank
think
you, Christine.
From staff's perspective, I think the allocation of these reserves, you know, the primary driver was finding non-recurring uses for the funds, and I think Finance Advisory Committee's it's not an exact science on how to allocate them, and I think the staff concurs and is, you know, fine modifying, would support modifying the budget to incorporate the recommendation in its final budget.
Thanks to the Finance Advisory Committee. We really appreciate your expertise in working on this.
Thank you.
So before I close out and turn it over to council questions, public comment, and council comment, I do want to just, I need to close with sort of the obligatory city manager kind of gloom and doom. I do want to focus on, that we are seeing some good economic improvement. Obviously, the city's revenue sources are not as diversified as I would particularly like if I had my druthers. We are heavily invested in retail sales and sales tax, which is a very volatile source of revenue. There are, property taxes can be a much more stable revenue source overall than sales tax. So I would continue to look for ways in which we can diversify our revenue base so that we are less reliant on the single source and less subject to the whims of the economy. The RDA dissolution as it's moving forward is that we potentially can lose that RDA administrative allowance sooner than we think. We are projecting the phase out over the next couple of years. That is a risk. Obviously, litigation is always can always hit you, and we've had a decent run of it, although we do have a challenging case that we're dealing with right now off the Rispin property. And in 2017, as I mentioned before, we're just going to have to keep our eye on that year because there's going to be a lot of things changing for the city as Measure D and the POB both expire. So with that, I'm just going to close out with the schedule as we move forward. We plan to meet next week with the community group presentations. Then on June 4th, we will continue our budget deliberations, and we can be bringing back any information the council members have requested that we assemble. And then we have extra meetings if we don't adopt on June 4th for June 19th and June 26th to consider final adoption. However, our goal will be to have the final adoption papers ready for the June 4th meeting if the council is ready to adopt by then.
Okay. Yes, Dennis.
Jamie, is for a city our size, is our debt service at a normal level? Is it a low level? Is it, where is it in comparison to a normal for a city?
When we looked at that, we looked at that for our benchmark study, and at that point we were, I want to say, the second lowest debt service outside of Scotts Valley. We are higher now than we were at that point. We are still low.
We're still low?
I'm still low. I haven't updated those numbers, but at that point we didn't have very much debt at all. At this point we have a little bit more, but we're still low. As the overall percentage of our general fund, I want to say total payments are around $300,000.
I believe so. In fact, I think in last year's budget, we had updated it to reflect. Let me look really quick.
My guess is we're probably on the order of 3%, 2 or 3%, which is certainly well within the healthy range.
But one interesting thing that I found out when we were talking about this a number of years ago, because I always thought we had enough. I thought, oh, this is enough. And let's not have more in reserves than we need. Let's spend it to fix the streets and things like that. So I called around all the cities, and I got the information. Actually, most of them had a little bit more in reserves, and that was their goal. But the interesting thing was they didn't have a policy. They just had a goal. But it was not like ours where the city is really supposed to stick to that, and it's a real firm policy. That's why I've argued that it should just be a goal. If we make it, fine. If we don't quite make it, we'll make it maybe the next year. But we need to have some flexibility because our spending and our expenses need that flexibility because you never know what other extra things are going to come up during the year. So anyway, I'm fine with us having these higher levels now after having called around and gotten the other jurisdictions' numbers, that they felt more comfortable with those than lower numbers. So I think we're doing all right.
So I do want to correct my response. Scotts Valley actually had the highest general fund debt to revenue, and they were about just over 5.5%. That's still considered very low for a city. Capitola, like I said, we were just about 2%, probably right about 2% in this year's budget. And the lowest that we found of anyone was Laguna Beach at 1%. And Laguna Beach, if I recall correctly, was the largest of our benchmark cities who had large enterprise operations. And the enterprise operations may allow them to push off some of their debt out of the general fund into other accounts. So that may help explain.
Yeah, they have some other things going on down there too, so
Yeah.
it may not be comparing apples and apples.
Would debt be a problem for us if we decide to do a major project within the city, existing debt? I mean, having it.
The overall debt levels where we are right now wouldn't concern me significantly. I think the question comes down to, there's the notion of good debt, which we've had the conversation with before, and really, in my opinion, those are for projects that are going to have a long lifespan, so that the users of the project are going to be the same ones who pay for it. That is, if it takes 20 years to pay off, that the improvement's there for 20 years and those pet residents can pay off. In addition, for capital improvement type projects where saving up just doesn't make sense because the cost of the improvement is going to go up faster than you can, faster than the return the city would get on its money. So in other words, building it now is cheaper. What debt does do, though, is everyone needs to keep in mind is it means that our current, our ongoing expenditures need to be reduced by a commensurate level. So in terms of the overall debt load, I don't think that we're, in a bad position. I certainly think we have headroom. That being said, if we were to have $200,000 or $300,000 more of debt payment, we would need to find a commensurate reduction elsewhere in the budget.
Just to understand the debt part of it, I'm sorry, Sam.
No, you go finish it.
Could you do a spreadsheet for us and give us our debt obligations project by project or item by item, and give us what it's costing us for that money, how long the terms are, and information, regarding each one of those loans?
Yes.
Could you do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to comment, if we're looking at taking on additional debt, I think you have to look forward into 2017 when we're going to be losing the Measure D, and we're going to have about a $400,000 delta. So whatever you're testing or measuring, you need to project it into that era and then see if we could still manage that debt without trading it off against other ongoing expenditures. Are there other questions at this time on the staff report before I open it up to the public? Seeing none. I did have one question about, I heard that the 911 charge, our fee is going up by $41,000. What's the reason for that? Is it a one-time increase? Is this going to be ongoing every year?
Mr. Mayor, so that has been the source of considerable debate at the 911 board, and really what that's the result of is that the disparate fiscal positions of the various member agencies. And we have had a number of capital expenditures that have been planned for a while, and because some of the member agencies aren't in as stable a position as the City of Capitola has been the last couple of years, they have looked to the extent possible to push off those expenditures. So it's resulted in lower budgets overall for 911, which were frankly not sustainable in the long term. That is, they didn't have things like the facilities fund or the equipment fund being budgeted on an ongoing basis, and there were some larger acquisitions that were going to hit down the road. Frankly, the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch system, which are very expensive, is going to need to be updated in the next couple of years, and they're
going crazy.
They're quite expensive, unfortunately, and I have been advocating to establish this reserve to try to normalize the expenditures out of 911, and out of deference to some of the other member agencies that aren't as in a strong a fiscal position and trying to minimize costs to the extent possible in the current year, we're not going to do that. So there will be some swings in the 911, but really that's what it's about, is really kind of trying to drive down the cost the last couple of years to a point that wasn't at a sustainable level.
Didn't we have an increase 2 years ago?
In context, we're still, even with this increase, this $41,000 increase, we're still lower than we were 3 or 4 years ago.
Didn't we bring San Benito County into this thing?
We
What
did.
happened with that?
We did. That drove down our costs. Off the top of my head, do you have it, Tori? I think we went from something like $500,000 to $400,000 over a 3-year period, and this was really out of the San Benito merger and real strong efforts by management to get the costs down at dispatch. And I made the point that that wasn't going to be at a sustainable level. However, when the question is for some of the jurisdictions having a cop on the street today versus planning for the future, their choice was, look, let's get the cop on the street today. So we are certainly lower than we've been in the past, even with the increase this year, and the comparison, I think, is just what jumps out at us.
Well, it sounds like there's a great deal going on at 911. Maybe it would be appropriate at a future council session to have a review of our participation and, our funding allocation, even looking at it historically, and maybe even with this increase, it's down from what it used to be. But I would also be interested in seeing what is Capitola's contribution in relationship to the return to the community from 911, and really how that's measured. How I would like to learn more about how the board looks at what's a fair allocation of the expenses of that operation.
Would you like to see how the budget's developed and how the costs are allocated during the budget sessions, or would you like to see more of a robust discussion from the general manager, sort of a bigger picture at 911?
Well, it seemed like we wouldn't need to do it as part of the budget discussions. It sounds like it may be, afterwards. Once we've gone through this, we could have a review. I don't know if I want to alter the budget allocation that we have currently, but maybe just a better understanding, and also a look at how is the fair allocation tested from among the jurisdictions. So.
And that has been a source of considerable debate over the years, and in fact, we did update the funding formula really to figure out how we were going to deal with San Benito in a fair way, how the member agencies, as well as the contract agencies, if you will, we're all going to participate in that. So it's a complicated formula, and actually Tori helped update that. Was it 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago, yes.
So it is something that I'd love to share with the council.
Right, thank you.
And their members are open to us too, if members of the participating agencies want to go. And also, if you haven't gone for a sit-along with one of the employees up there, it's fascinating. You can go up there, call ahead of time, and make arrangements, and you can sit and listen to the dispatchers deal with Capitola, the Capitola officers, and or CHP or other things. It's absolutely fascinating.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think at this time, if there are no other questions on the staff report, I'm going to open up the microphone and see if there's any member of the public that would like to address the council on the budget, 14-15 budget. Anyone? Seeing none, I'm going to close the microphone and bring it back for council for the discussion. And just to remind, the only recommended action is that we receive this overview, provide staff direction. We'll be actually approving the budget at a future budget session. I believe a week from tomorrow night is the actual community programs presentation, May the 29th. And so with that, council members, who would like to maybe begin the discussion? Stephanie.
Well, I'll get it right out there. We'll talk about the elephant in the room, which is my interest in having a line item for the Human Care Alliance and not having all this uncertainty year after year after year. Not that there wouldn't be a little bit, but to try to minimize it, because it's pretty awful to try to run an agency and you're not sure what your budget is going to be. And so I'd really like the council to consider a formula that we had before, which was a percentage of sales tax and property tax. And we don't have to make any decisions tonight, but let's come back with some information and look at it, so that we could probably come up with something that we could all agree on, put that in a budget, and that'll be it. And then next year, of course, we'll look at it, look at our funds to see whether we can continue to afford at that level, which would be pretty much what we're going to give this year, and maybe a COLA, and see if there's in some way we can come up with taking the uncertainty out of this and really consider these our partners, that they are people that we contract for services, that they are important services, that we don't want to do without them, that we can't provide them, nobody else is providing them, and that they are an integral part of our city and the services that we provide as partners with these agencies. And I think that we'll still review them every year to see if we want to continue with some or increase some and decrease others, but I'd really like us to take a look at that. It's just a big issue for them, and a big issue for us, and a big issue for the clients. I mean, how would you like to be told that on Meals on Wheels you can't have one? I mean, that's sort of unheard of, but these agencies are going to get to the point where they're getting more and more requests, and they can't provide services to everybody. So they're continuing to find additional revenues, but I'd really like to get some council feedback, and maybe at our next meeting, or have a subcommittee, talk about this and come back with a recommendation, but to really see if we can do something this year. It might not be there in perpetuity, but at least for a number of years, to try to give some sense of partnership that's really there in the budget, And as I say, it's not in stone, but it's there as a sort of a baseline.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. If you don't mind, Dennis, I would like to, since Stephanie, you brought up the community programs, I did have a little housekeeping request for the council members, and in the 8 years I've been on the council, this is potentially the first year that I'll actually get to participate and vote on the community programs allocations. But in reviewing this, I did realize that the Community Action Board, CAB, is one of the community program agencies. My wife works for CAB. They get a rather modest allocation of $1,500. So I was going to ask the council if they would be willing to maybe split that particular allocation off or deal it separately, so I could recuse myself from that particular one, but I would finally be able to participate in the overall community programs grants.
Yeah.
Right. So I would really, if there could be a motion to that effect, or
We don't need a motion, we'll just do it.
okay, if the council is amenable to that, we will just at that point consider that as a separate line. And Mike, you had a...
Also, it was noted that my company is doing some electrical work for Dientes, and they are about the same as CAB. They're $1,200, but in the interest of transparency, that's also something that should be taken separately because of financial interest. And in addition to financial interest, and it doesn't require a recusement of any council member, but we have several council members that sit on the boards of some of these recipients. I think they should still be able to vote on community grants, but it should be made public which boards they sit on, and they may want to minimize the force in which they lobby for their own board's grant money.
Well, they can't do that. They can't do that. They can't lobby for it.
Although we have 2 council members that are on boards,
Right.
and they do lobby for it, and I don't understand why not. I mean, they're great institutions, but I think we need to be reserved in our zeal. I'm so happy that, although I'm the vice chair of the Red Cross, they took themselves off the list a couple of years ago. Thank you very much, Red Cross. So I don't have to worry about that, but I think it's important just to let the public know that we also serve in other capacities because of being public figures,
Right.
elected.
And they should probably abstain when that item comes up.
Maybe not abstain, but just, I don't think anyone needs to beat the drum for their own personal board, but they still certainly vote on it because there's no financial interest, and that's the cutoff. Where Sam has mentioned the financial interest of his wife, I've mentioned the small financial interest of Triad Electric. I think that requires recusing yourself. Other than that, just public information, it would be nice.
Okay. Yes, Dennis, you want to...
Well, I follow with Stephanie about the community groups issue, and we seem to talk about this every year, the last 3 years, and we never make motions. So in concept, if we, it's real difficult to deal with for this budget session here, but certainly if we gave ourselves a timetable of 6 months to send it back to staff and direct the staff to set up some type of guaranteed funding program we would like to see for the council, and give them 6 months, and then the council sets themselves up as a subcommittee, that we have 6 months to put it together. Then we're not to this point again next year and not have that. And so I think that we should make a goal this year to establish that, and do it not in a 9 or 12-month program, but do it in a 6-month program.
Well, we can just do it
What?
now. We don't have to wait. It can be part of this budget process.
Well, I think there's a lot of things to be discussed, Stephanie, that we know how much, we really know what we're doing for this budget session, pretty much.
We haven't decided anything. We haven't even discussed what we're going to do with the community groups.
Well, I don't think it's something we can set up overnight. In other words, I think it's going to take a little while to do this. And so my only point is don't wait, don't discuss it this year and put it off till next year to discuss it. Give direction to staff that we want to do this within a period of time, in 6 months, whatever it is. But I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, I say do it now, and then the intent will be to continue it unless we have a financial disaster.
Okay. I have a couple things here. I'm real concerned about the wharf. And our wharf fund basically denotes the revenue that we take in from it and the minor repairs that we take on. It's costing us money to keep that wharf there. That we really need to find an outside funding partner, or if we can't do that, we need to establish a fund, a WARF fund that actually has some way that we, year by year, that we're actually putting money away for that fund, in that fund, and planning for its future, because it's not a forever WARF. It seems like it is, but it's not. And we're going to come to a time that we're going to lose the WARF, very important part of Capitola, and not have any means of putting it back. We need to establish a fund for ADA improvements in the city. In other words, we need to allocate amount of money every year that we specifically dedicate to ADA improvements within the city. And I think that we should start with some amount of money this year and put that aside. And also give strong, firm direction to our community development and to our building department as to enforcement of ADA, and Public Works as to making us a hit list as to where we can do ADA improvements within the community. The Parking Reserve Fund. I'd like to see a Parking Reserve Fund that actually establishes a number of means of revenue that can come into that. Everything from parking districts or whatever we choose to do, so we can plan these parking, provide our parking, for our parking in the city without having to go into debt to do it. And this project here, yes, timing was right to do what we had to do here, but if we do go for a multi-story here, or any type of parking improvements within the city, that we have a reserve fund that we're collecting money into it. And that could also include a percentage of parking meter fees that should go into that fund. And I think we're actually supposed to be doing that. Is that true, Jamie? Is there something that...
Your council will recall that I believe it's 25% of the parking revenue in the village right now is going into a parking reserve fund. Generates about $100,000 a year. That is programmed into the debt service to pay for the lower Pat Cove lot. So
Okay.
yes, there is funds that were earmarked. We do have a parking reserve fund, and it's being used on the debt service. We used it to buy some of the pay stations and a couple other improvements, but at this point it's on the debt service.
Okay. I think it's time for the city to go to 11% with TOT. I think the community's ready to accept it. It's paid for from people on the outside. The county and the city of Santa Cruz have absolutely no problem at all passing that measure. And it's time for us to do that. And we could actually designate where that money goes, including the possibility of putting that into the parking fund. I agree with the Finance Committee's recommendation for the to increase the reserves by $200,000. In the contingency reserve, in the mid-year, if we have to use it for something, we have it there and it's banked. And we seem to always come up with it. And a perfect example is this year is we make a decision about the sidewalks within the village. And fortunately, we did have the money there to do it. But those things happen. And so increasing by $200,000 when we have it is good policy. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Any other council members? Ed?
Sure. One project that was put on the budget was the Esplanade Reclamation Project, and I'm not sure what that entails, the $30,000, but I'm a big proponent of that project. If anybody's been to the Esplanade lately to see the colors of the lawn or the dirt, it's not the kind of look we want to give. And you know, we have an historic street lawn way that they're maintaining, but I'm really committed to that project. I hope we can. I'm not sure what the $30,000 is for, whether that's to draw up some engineering or whether that actually makes the improvements. But you know, we've been getting complaints 6 months ago about not enough water pressure for the shower heads, and kids don't have enough to wash their surfboards. So we went from one complaint or area of complaints about not enough water, and here we find ourselves in this drought where there's too much water, and I sit there and watch it all be wasted. The fact that we have the potential to either capture it for the bathrooms or for the lawn, I don't know what the water use of that is. I did locate a meter out in front, but I'd like the city to direct staff to get back to me on how much water goes in, because what I've been told is that the entire Esplanade area is on 1 meter. And if we could just find out what that usage is and how much water we actually could, claim, I think it sends a good message that if we do capture the water, we're able to do something with it and possibly restore a little bit of beauty back to Esplanade Park. It may even include, redoing those showers, which are pretty dilapidated as they are right now. So I'd like to see some costs on that. In the facilities fund, it's funny, we sit here and we move money into savings and we don't put money in funds. There's a lot of funds that are being suggested to be created, but every time we rob from Peter to pay Paul, it's like I'm not sure what we cut out to establish these funds. I did see on the facilities funds, I agree with Dennis, the wharf needs some attention, okay, and I don't know if that was included. Was that listed in the facilities fund as one of the potential?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the wharf is included as one of the facilities
Yeah.
that's going to need attention here coming up.
So even though I like the recommendation of the finance committee for reserves, I mean they were taking money out of the facilities fund, which is, as Dennis said, I don't think we can continue to ignore all of our facilities. We have a lot, so I'm torn about which direction we go there. With regards to the community grants, I think we're going to do a 2-year program, and I think that in itself gives them a little bit of stability. I kind of like Dennis's idea about directing staff to take 6 months to look at it, because what you've hit us with is a lot of good things for this year and next year, and I'm concerned about the pension obligation bond going away, the sales tax stabilizing, the end of Measure D and Measure O standing alone, and I think we're very fortunate right now to be making such a great contribution to CIP at this time and seeing these improvements. But when that all stabilizes, which I believe is 17, is when I think we're really in a position to say, okay, we can make this commitment to, because I think that's when we stabilize. It looks like that's the year when stability starts. And I agree with you, Stephanie. It'd be nice to tell these people, okay, we're going to have a formula that's going to be based on stable revenues, and that way you don't have to worry about it. So I like the idea of Dennis saying, hey, take 6 months, come back to us, and with a formula that's based on a stable forecast, not on, because I really think we're in swing right now. Pretty much that's all I got. That's it for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Mike?
Sure. I'll take everybody else's extra time. I have concerns about the head count, overall city employees creeping up. It happens ahead at a time. And we're creeping up to our all-time high, which was about 6 years ago. I want to be very careful, especially in planning and finance. I think that while it was indicated that the general plan fees, the general plan needs as far as fees will dwindle to zero by the end of this coming fiscal year. Nothing is mentioned about the general plan fee, and we'll have 20 years to start anew to save up for what I'm sure will be the $5 million general plan in 20 years. But I think we can easily cut the general plan fee in half, since we started this general plan fee too late and set that amount. So I'm very much in favor of that. I'd like to see the head count, the expense, and the income from traffic and public safety broken apart in the gross columns, only because, when we add, again, to head count, and it's all part of the police department, the inference is we have more law enforcement, when actually the reality is we have more parking tickets being written. I want to clearly see who's on the street in public safety and who is in traffic enforcement. The laser fiche system, I would assume, from that point on, when a council member or a planning commissioner needs to see a set of plans as approved after a building is built for comparison, that we'll actually be able to do that. It has been such a challenge in all my years of planning commissioner / city council, and it's important. A comment about 911, is 911 truly planning on moving its radio room down to the sheriff's station in Live Oak? Is that part of the plan in any way?
That doesn't, that doesn't ring a bell.
No 911 facilities whatsoever to be relocated down to Chanticleer?
Well, if I answer definitively, I may be proven wrong. I don't believe so. What's happening is that the EOC, which has been up at 911, is going down to Chanticleer.
Okay.
If that sounds
The
like what
EOC
you're-
is not part of that JPA, or is?
The EOC is the county's emergency operations center.
Correct.
And the county's emergency operations center, the county has been paying rent to the JPA for years to have 2,000 square feet for an emergency operations center up there.
So we're going to lose that.
We're going to lose the
funding.
rent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. We usually get a really good report on how our cash flow works over the year, and we're doing really well this year in spite of the true-ups and the ups and downs that we go through because we have different times that we receive money as opposed to the ongoing consistent spending of money. I'd like to see what it's going to look like in the coming year. It would be comforting to see a year projection where we don't have to slice and dice funds and take money out. And I know it's all our money, and I know it's all a fund that's easy to transfer, but just for clarity, just for transparency, it would be nice to see us at some point have enough in our general fund so that that doesn't happen, and and we just ride through and we always have the cash. I think we should not overlook the potential of reducing debt that costs us significant money. Even though we have a low percentage, at some point when we're fully funded, especially with contingency reserves, for us to be able to pay off debt and make 2, 3, or 4% is great. Especially now when we're in the rhythm of getting our reserves higher than they've ever been. 25% is laudable, and it's where we should be. And we must also remember, in addition to our reserves, we have all these funds that we've set aside for doing things like buying vehicles, repairing buildings. There are so many other funds we have. Our stores fund, which is kind of petty cash. But information technology, all these things, when we see that bar go down below zero in that one chart, we didn't spend that money. We put that money aside. That should be underscored when you bring the budget back. One last note about community groups. I'm very reluctant to make them a hard percentage of our revenue. Everybody on this council has been here for years, and we've all seen what can happen. I'm fearful of that. What I'm not fearful of is setting a baseline and even I don't know what we call it, certainly not a resolution, but a plan to have a COLA on a yearly basis from that baseline. Not saying how that gross amount would be spent or distributed, but I think this council will be willing to say, you know, we want to spend $350 or $375 on community groups each year, barring any unforeseen circumstances. And it's our hope to increase it each year by the cost of living, by the increased cost of doing the programs. To tie it as a percentage of our sales tax or our property tax is very, very dangerous. And we will find ourselves eating our words at some point, which we've all dined on before. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you very much. Nicely done budget. Thank you very much.
Sam, I have some more, but I'll wait till you've spoken.
Oh, okay.
Can I respond to just, I think, 1 or 2 points that Councilmember Termini brought up? I think that the debt reduction options, do keep in mind that we are funding our POB obligation at a fully funded level this year, which is, from my perspective, is the highest return that the city can get on any investment that we can make. Not very liquid, but nevertheless, it's the highest return. The other is that PERS is changing the rules about how they pool our investments, and this is a pretty esoteric topic, but nevertheless, the changes in the rules will result, as proposed, in increased options for the city to pay off its long-term liabilities. And I believe one of the cities down south just paid off $21 million to PERS to be fully funded for now and evermore. So there are some changes coming along.
A question on that. As we reach the end of the unfunded liability pension obligation bond payoff, which I think almost everyone except for Ed was involved in that. Great work, loved it. We've done a good job, attaboy. Is there another one creeping up behind us? In other words, can I expect PERS and the state to come to us and say, remember that unfunded liability? We have another one very similar for you, and here's the bill.
Right. So to answer that question, to put my PERS hat on, I'd say no. There hasn't been any significant changes in the city's benefit packages other than with the exception of reducing them through the pension reform. So those pension obligations often stem from enhancing pension benefits, and that's where you accrue what's called the side fund with PERS, and that's what the POB, so a lot of terminology, was used to pay off. There's a small side fund that's sat there for the last 12 years. It is scheduled for payoff at some point. It's a couple $100,000. Now, PERS rules, as I mentioned before, are going to change so that if a city wants, it can try to pay off its own unfunded liability, which is different than the side fund. And that has to do with the long-term performance that PERS has gotten, whether they've met or underperformed in their return assumptions.
Is there an amount associated with this?
We've never seen the amount before.
That's what's worrying me.
Right. But what I'll tell you, so the city right now is pooled. Our PERS investments are pooled with other small cities. They're basically going to kind of unpool us. This has to do with the pension reform. They're going to unpool us, and so we'll basically see what our unpaid bill sort of is. There's different schools of thought about how to deal with that, and we can talk about that when it comes. But in terms of a side fund analogous to what we did before, no, there isn't an equivalent out there looming. But from a political standpoint, you could call this next thing potentially similar.
Large amount of money we owe to the state. Pretty much the same definition.
Right. It certainly would have to do with the flavors of how you want to define it. Now, we'll see. We'll see what comes down. These are all proposals right now in front of the PERS board. We don't know what they're ultimately going to do and how it ultimately plays out and what makes the most sense.
Okay.
And then lastly, on the general fund cash flow, you asked a question about that. And so in general, I think Council's been doing this long enough. You guys are well aware that in December we reach our sort of cash flow point where we usually hit somewhere between 13 and 18% of our total general fund expenditures down. That is, we start the year flat, and we've spent 13 to 18% more of our general fund than we've received at that point. The intent behind our contingency reserve, you'll recall when we increased it, was to establish a fund that was explicitly for that purpose to help with the cash flow cycle throughout the year. So as we approach full funding in the contingency reserve, I do believe that between the general fund balance and the contingency reserve, that will be the sole source, if you will, of the cash flow operations throughout the fiscal year.
It's always unsettling to see certain funds go negative in order to help cash flow or to move things around. And when I see the fluctuations in the different funds from the Treasurer's monthly reports, while I understand it, if I were looking at it for the first time as a citizen, I would be shocked and confused. So what I'm trying to do is just get a very stable way that anyone could open up the monthly Treasury report and go, oh, okay, I see, that's good, nice, close it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to begin by really congratulating staff on one, presenting a tremendous result to the 13-14 year budget, which was over a $600,000 fund surplus, which we've been able to discuss. We used some of it in this year, carrying over some of it, and this is, with all the years I've been here, this is really a very positive budget and budget year. After even all the things that we've talked about here currently, we still have a budget projected at the end of 14-15, a budget fund balance, our surplus once again of $199,176. So, my congratulations to you, Jamie and Tori and staff, for bringing us, all you guys in the front row, bringing us these very positive results. This is all due to the hard work of the staff. So compliments to everyone on this result. I want to, on the facilities fund, I think it is important that we establish a facilities fund. We should have some discussions, though, about what is the goal of those choices that were mentioned. The depreciation amount, $70,000 a year, or 2 to 5% of the facilities value. Which one do we want to choose? What is that ultimate number target that we want to shoot for? I think if we don't have a target, then it can either just become a floating slush fund, or we don't have enough money in it when we really need it. So I would like to see us work on that. On the CIP projects overall, that's a tremendous list, Steve. You know, thank you for bringing all those forth. I do have some concern about whether you have the staffing to carry all those out in a timely manner. So I would, please let us know if you feel constrained or need additional assistance in some way. I think I agree with you. Maybe contract staff may be the better way to go to augment public works on these projects, particularly what we're facing in 2017. We don't want to hire and then realize that we're going to have to lay off folks a few years from now. On the community programs, this is great that I get to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it. And on the question of I mean, I'm really encouraged to hear all the discussions about establishing baselines, about establishing, you know, guaranteed funding. I do think, though, I mean, I'm in agreement with Dennis that we should take some time to really look at this because it maybe do a disservice, and my interest is in the now is increasing community programs funding. You know, we've over the last few years, it's been reduced from about 300,000 down to like 254. And I don't know if what we immediately want to do is guarantee a low level of funding when we're basically that's at the lowest point we've been in my memory. So I would say let's take some time to look at it. But there also, the community programs need to look at this as a two-way street. And that when, because as you heard, sales taxes are one of the most volatile sources of revenue. And so there has to be a commitment that when those go down, that the funding automatically goes down. And so I think that we really need to have a discussion and a dialogue about that. Look at the long term. I mean, you heard about 2017. Is that what you're really going to want to make a commitment to? I know in years past, even when the city has had difficulties, they've struggled really hard to maintain community programs funding. There's been also a great deal of advocacy to do that. And so the question is whether you want to go to a formula-based approach as opposed to, you know, an in-the-moment advocacy approach about where the most critical needs are. And I think that we should take the time. And I don't know 6 months, if we need 6 months, but let's spend at least a few weeks and if not a couple of months to discuss those relevant issues and see if we can bring something forth. And I will remind, you know, the council in 2004 did establish a formula basis. It was set up in 2004. It was kind of honored in 2005, and then the council in 2006 eliminated it. So, you know, we can't bind future councils to any kind of formula. We can make a statement if that's the will of the council here to hopefully have other council members at least know the importance of the partnership and how we want community programs to be treated. And on equal footing with all the city departments. Now, the city departments don't have guaranteed funding either, and so, but I think that we want to establish a firm partnership, value the work that all the departments and by extension the community programs do. So what I would like to see, I mean, right now, talking about trying to find additional funding for community programs, and maybe not fully in this year, but making some effort to incrementally move it back up to the high point, and looking at the needs that have been expressed, both in the request for COLAs and the request for additional funding, new programs. And so hopefully we can put some effort behind that as well, and respond to it and honor as many as we feel are prudent and justified by the needs of the community. So those are my thoughts about community programs and how I would like to see us move forward with that. And with that, I think that concludes my comments, and I'll let Stephanie have the last word.
Well, I just had some other comments on the budget. And previously, the formula stipulated that if revenues went up, the contracts would go up. As our revenues went down, they would go down. So, I mean, that was always understood, that was our partnership. And so that would be what I would suggest again, not that it'd be a hard and fast number, because you can't do that from year to year. But, you know, for something that's been going on for 30 years and we're still talking about, you know, how this, and that it's not, you know, part of a permanent part of our budget, you know, it's kind of crazy. And I think it's time, you know, to incorporate it, make it formally a part of our budget and our allocations. The number will be determined every year. Some other comments that I have are that I would really like to establish a council subcommittee on ADA. You know, I'd love to have a committee, but I don't really want to have to staff another committee, and council members have to go to another meeting and have to have, you know, the residents come and so forth. We can do it kind of informally, but to have 2 council members review our current ADA plan and bring recommendations to the council for future activities. We've talked about it, but, you know, I think it should be something that really needs to be looked at, and the council members need to. So I'd really like the council concurrence to appoint 2 people to be on that, to meet over some period of time to bring some recommendations back to the council on increased funding and spending and priorities for our ADA commitment. I'd like to just have a little money in the budget for a birthday party for the library. The library is 15, and so I think just probably in springtime, beginning of the summer, something for the kids on a Saturday, which is cake and ice cream and punch. But something to celebrate and bring people there. The kids are there, they're playing, there's story hour, but just to have some celebration of what we did 15 years ago, which was a real milestone at the time, because the library that had been across the street had been closed for a number of years, and we did not have a library. I'd like to consider funding for a camera on 41st Avenue across from the Fairfield, or on the Fairfield Inn property at our beautiful new sculpture, so that we can have some extra security. And I don't know how much that costs, but maybe to have the staff come back with some cost estimates, and because we really want to keep a close eye on those, and maybe another set of cameras somewhere else on 41st to keep an eye on the other sculptures. We absolutely don't want to lose those, and if somebody tries, it'd be nice to have cameras for that purpose or other purposes. I'm not sure, but to have staff come back with some information on that. I had a question for Lisa on page 13. It talks about $9,000 for recycling education. I thought it was 3. It was 3 a few years ago.
13.
It's on page 11. It just says about the middle, up above the line under maintain and improve capital natural resources, maintain $9,000 in funding for recycling education.
It's a combination of several programs put together. So it's education, it's materials and supplies, it's a compilation.
Okay, great.
I'll take more.
On page 19, I just had a question. They're talking about business types that we have in town. And since it did decrease by 48 businesses, did we contact those businesses to tell them that they didn't renew?
I believe it looks like the businesses had just closed
out
or
of
changed,
business?
I'd have to look at it a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, I'm just curious that if we're not calling them and telling them they didn't renew, that we need to do that. I think we probably are, though.
Yes, I believe we are.
Okay, page 18, just to the left there, airports, we need to add Watsonville Airport. I forgot that. And I'd like us to, at some point, have a goal for this year of doing some disaster preparedness education. And I brought it up before, and I know, it's out there, but I'd really like to make a concerted effort to work with our residents through the newsletter, through other public education, so that they are earthquake prepared, they are disaster prepared. And, we all think we are, or we all think, oh, it's, we're going to be okay. But, we lived through it, and people didn't have stuff ready. They didn't have water. They were freaked out because they didn't have electricity. And so, it will happen again, and maybe in our lifetime, maybe not. But I'd really like us to kind of embrace that as a city activity at some point, to send out a brochure to everybody, or, just have some public education and, make it again you can only lead a horse to water, as they say, and the rest. But I just think that probably if you took a survey now of people and their garages or in their homes, I bet it would be a small number. I don't know whether they have any statistics, Mike, but I'd kind of be curious to know. I bet it's small, and I hope I'm wrong, but I bet it's small. And last year, I reported after one of the Chamber of Commerce meetings that they had the representative from the Red Cross there, and she gave a great presentation, and I said, I know all that, I'm doing all that, blah, 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 until she got to the part of everybody should have a bicycle in their garage, a working bicycle in their garage, which I didn't even think of, because if you need to go check on your aunt, uncle, mother, father, grandmother, or some child or something like that, and the roads are out, or split, or there's a fire or disaster, something, gas leak or something, and you can't drive, and they're a ways away, if you don't want to walk, you need a bicycle to get there. You might need a bicycle to get somewhere. And so, anyway, that was just something, I didn't know. And
We're getting ready to launch a program with Orchard Supply and Outdoor World, where they all will carry a list of emergency items in the store that people can purchase, and we're working with local merchants in Capitola particularly to inform people of what they should have.
Yeah,
and where they could buy them.
Just something like, we are disaster preparedness ready, or some positive message to it. And it's something I think would go a long ways for the future.
How about a tsunami warning siren?
Yes. Well, there's some signs.
I'm working on yours in my garage right
Thank you,
now.
Mike.
It's coming along. Thank you.
Good. We will use
I'd like us to take a look at that path on Prospect. I brought that up before. Last time I walked up there, it was dangerous and kind of a liability issue. The one on the other side overlooking the ocean, that it gets narrower and narrower and has holes in it and so forth, and leads up to the area by the railroad tracks, and then you can take the rickety stairs downstairs. I'd really like to look at that and either improve it or abandon it or something, because it's a problem waiting to happen, I think, and it's not safe. It's not safe. There's
Too narrow,
and somebody's going to trip on one of those holes in the ground. It's not level at all. So I'd really like us to check on that. And then I'd like us to this would be really probably very inexpensive, redo the sign on 41st Avenue saying "Welcome to Capitola." The others look okay, but that one needs to be redone.
That's one of our potential work products for the Art and Cultural Commission.
That's great, because that's really good. I'd like us to increase the funding for the museum by $10,000. They used to have money in the budget for filming of living history interviews with prominent residents like Audrey, the owner and operator of the theater for many, many years. You can go to the museum and put in the cassette this wonderful interview that Carolyn did. She hasn't been doing them for years because they didn't have it in their budget. It was removed at some point. I'd like to put it back in. There are people in town that we need to record their stories. We need to interview them and before they're gone. And so I'd like, at least $10,000 and to start that happening again, to professionally interview them and record that as part of our Capitola's living history. I wish we had done it with previous council members, but some of them are gone now, and so we've lost that opportunity to have that as a part of our history. So there's I support the increase in the facilities reserve, although, you know, if something did come up like you know, an emergency, we certainly always have that money to move it. So we always have to remember that the money in the budget is not only to be used for those things, except those that are truly designated with gas tax money or something like that. But things can shift as the year goes on. We like to know exactly what we're doing and not to have too many surprises. But we always have to remember that if the roof leaks or something like that, you know, don't panic. You know, if you don't have enough money in that particular fund, you move it, you borrow it from the other funds, you know, get the job done. And so, you know, we always have that ability. So we shouldn't get too hung up on, you know, designating everything in, you know, a little pigeonhole. We didn't used to have all those little pigeonholes. We had big categories, you know, and we got the job done, and you needed money, you moved it around. So now we have all these little designated funds, but they can be flexible. So as needs arise, we have that ability. And I think we always want to express to the community that we want to provide excellent public service and keep the streets and beach and the creek clean, and pay attention to really providing a high quality of life here for people always. That's our goal. And this is how we express it. That's how we spend our money. And so I think we've done some tremendously wonderful, wonderful things in this community, and I look forward to having another great year.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ed?
Just one
Yeah.
quick question, yeah, I forgot. We just mentioned that we're opening Beach Parking Lot 2, and somewhere I lost it or I never saw it. What happened to the beach bathroom, and what's going on with that?
The bathroom down in that parking lot.
Right.
So the price for that exceeded our budget almost by twofold. So we are now moving forward to try and put together a design project to bring in a modular unit, a pre-built, prefab. So what most state parks and are using now. So we're working on that. We're still trying to identify what those costs would be and a budget for that. So we'll be coming back to you as we finalize the construction project there. We anticipate having some funding remaining that we will then identify for that project.
So the likelihood of that being in operation would be?
For the summer, it's not likely.
We've got a sewer line that runs right through there. It shouldn't probably be any problem hooking up to sewer, huh?
That's the easy part, yes.
Okay.
Anything else from council members?
Thanks to staff for all the hard work and preparing this. Again, as always, it's really a pleasure to read, and the graphs are great, and the photographs are great. It's really user-friendly, I think. It's very good.
So with that, I did want to remind them of our schedule, of our budget schedule. On May the 29th will be our community programs presentation, and maybe the Human Care Alliance could be prepared to respond to some of the comments they've heard here this evening. And we have another one scheduled for June the 4th, and if we need one, on the 19th and the 26th for further deliberations and adoption. With that, I'll adjourn us to the next regular scheduled meeting of the City Council, which will be tomorrow, Thursday evening, May